Welcome back to AU Family Channel, and thank you so much for being here. It truly means the world to have you as one of our loyal listeners. If our stories have ever touched your heart, we are so grateful that you keep coming back to spend this time with us. So find somewhere comfortable, take a slow, deep breath, and let us begin today's story, together. I have a twin brother named Lucas, and for the first 18 years of my life, I was never just myself. I was always one half of a comparison, the other twin, the one who was not quite as good at the things Lucas was good at. We shared a face, a birthday, a bedroom, and a lifetime of being measured against each other by everyone who met us. This is the story of how I spent my childhood trapped in my identical brother's shadow, resenting the person I loved most in the world, and how we finally learned, the hard way, that being compared to someone is not the same as being in competition with them. Being a twin is a strange thing that people who are not twins can never fully understand. From the moment we were born, Lucas and I were a matched set, a curiosity, a two-for-one. People did not see two separate boys. They saw a pair, and they could not help comparing the halves of that pair, holding us up against each other, measuring. Who was taller? Who was smarter? Who was more outgoing? And somewhere very early, a story got written about the two of us that would shape my whole childhood. Lucas was the golden one, and I was the other one. It was never said out loud, not exactly. But I felt it in 1,000 small ways, every single day, for years. Lucas was, to be fair, genuinely gifted. He was the kind of kid who was good at everything without seeming to try, quick and charming and naturally talented, the boy teachers loved and other kids wanted to be near. And I was good too, at most of the same things, just a little less. A little slower, a little quieter, a little less golden. Which is the cruelest position of all, because I was close enough to Lucas to be constantly compared to him, but never quite close enough to win the comparison. If I had been completely different from my brother, I could have been my own person. But being his near-identical shadow, I was doomed to be measured against him forever, and to fall just short. The comparisons were constant, and most of the people making them did not even realize they were doing it. A relative would praise Lucas's report card and then turn to mine and say, "And you did well too." A coach would marvel at Lucas's natural ability and then tell me, encouragingly, that if I worked hard I could almost catch up to my brother. Teachers would call me by his name, then correct themselves. Every achievement of mine was measured against his, every success of his was a bar I was expected to reach. I grew up feeling like a slightly inferior copy of another person, a person who happened to be my own brother, the person I loved most and resented most in the exact same breath. The resentment grew slowly, like a weed, and I hated myself for it, which only made it worse. I loved Lucas. He was my twin, my other half, my closest companion since before we were born. We had shared a womb, a crib, a childhood. And yet, as the comparisons ground on year after year, I began to resent him, to feel a bitterness toward him that shamed me, because none of it was his fault. He did not ask to be the golden one. He did not make the comparisons. He was just being himself, brilliantly, and the world was doing the rest. But I could not separate my brother from the shadow he cast, and so I began, in the secret parts of my heart, to resent the person I loved most. What made it unbearable was that Lucas had no idea. He was so comfortable in himself, so unbothered by the comparisons that were slowly poisoning me, that he did not even notice they were happening. He loved me completely and uncomplicatedly, the way he did everything, and he could not see the way the world was crushing me in the gap between us, because from his side there was no gap. To Lucas, we were just two brothers who loved each other. To me, we were a competition I was losing every day, in a race I had never agreed to run, against an opponent I adored. And I could not tell him, because how do you tell someone that loving them is breaking your heart? I coped by trying to become different. If I could not beat Lucas at the things we were both good at, I decided I would find things that were only mine, corners of the world where no one could compare me to my brother because he was not there. I took up interests he had no part in. I made friends he did not share. I built, piece by piece, a small territory of my own, a self that was not defined by its distance from his. And it helped, a little. But even in my own territory, I could feel the shadow, because I had built it specifically to escape him, which meant that even my independence was defined by my brother. I could not get free of him even when I ran. He was in my running. The resentment reached its peak in our final years of school, when the comparisons took on real weight, because now they were about our futures. Lucas, the golden one, was being courted by everyone, his path smooth and bright and full of open doors. And I was, once again, the other twin, doing well, but in his shadow, my own achievements dimmed by the brilliance of his. I remember lying awake at night, consumed by a bitterness I was ashamed of, wishing, God forgive me, that I did not have a twin at all, that I could just be myself, a single person, measured against no one. I loved my brother and I wished he did not exist, both at once, and the contradiction was tearing me apart. The turning point came in the worst possible way. Lucas got sick. What started as tiredness turned into something serious, an illness that landed him in the hospital and, for a terrifying while, threatened to take him from us entirely. And in the space of a single doctor's appointment, my whole world reorganized itself. All the resentment, all the bitterness, all the years of feeling like the lesser twin, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a single desperate truth. I did not care about the comparisons. I did not care about being the golden one or the other one. I just wanted my brother to live. The shadow I had spent my whole life resenting was suddenly, unbearably, in danger of disappearing, and I discovered that a world without Lucas's shadow was a world I could not bear. I practically lived at the hospital during Lucas's illness. I sat by his bed for hours, held his hand through the worst of it, and somewhere in those long frightening nights, something between us cracked open. Because when you are watching your twin fight for his life, all the petty accounting of who is better falls away, and what is left is the deepest truth, which is that you are two halves of one thing, and you cannot lose the other half without losing part of yourself. I understood, in that hospital, that I had never really been in competition with Lucas at all. I had been in competition with a shadow, an idea, a comparison invented by other people. And now, faced with actually losing him, that shadow meant nothing, and my brother meant everything. One night, when he was very weak, Lucas said something that changed everything I thought I knew. He was drifting in and out, and he took my hand, and he said, quietly, I always wished I could be more like you. I thought he was delirious. Because it made no sense. He was the golden one. He was the one everyone compared me to and found me wanting. And I asked him what he meant, and he told me, in a weak voice, that he had spent his whole life feeling like a performance, like everyone loved the golden version of him and no one saw the real him, and that he had always envied me because I seemed so free, so much my own person, so real. My brother, the one I had resented for casting a shadow, had been quietly envying me the whole time. I could not believe it. All those years I had spent feeling like the lesser twin, and Lucas had spent them feeling like a hollow performance, envying the very independence I had built to escape him. We had been living the same tragedy from opposite sides, each of us convinced the other had it better, each of us secretly aching. He had seen my separate self, my own territory, my life outside his shadow, and he had longed for it, while I had been longing to be him. We had wasted years, both of us, comparing ourselves to each other and coming up short in our own eyes, never once realizing that the other twin was doing exactly the same thing, that the grass was not greener, that there was no golden twin and lesser twin at all. There were just two frightened boys who loved each other. Lucas survived. Slowly, over months, he fought his way back to health, and I was there for every step of it, and by the time he was well again, the two of us had become something we had never been before. Not rivals. Not a comparison. Just brothers, twins, two halves of one whole, finally seeing each other clearly. The illness had burned away the shadow that had stood between us our whole lives, and what was left underneath was the love that had always been there, the deepest bond either of us would ever have. We had almost lost each other before we ever really found each other. But we found each other. And that made the terror of his illness into the strange gift that saved our relationship. After Lucas recovered, we finally talked, really talked, about the years of comparison, the shadow, the resentment I had carried and the envy he had carried. I confessed everything, the bitterness I had felt, the shameful nights I had wished I did not have a twin. And instead of being hurt, Lucas understood completely, because he had felt his own version of it. We laughed, and we cried, and we forgave each other for the years we had wasted feeling like less because we were being measured against each other. And we made a pact, that night, that we would never again let the world's comparisons come between us, that we would define ourselves and each other, and let no one else write the story of who we were. The lowest point, oddly, came after all that healing, when we had to go back out into the world that had made us rivals. Because the comparisons did not stop just because we had made peace with each other. The relatives still compared our report cards. The coaches still measured us against each other. The world still saw a golden twin and a lesser twin, and it kept trying to force us back into those roles. And I felt the old resentment try to rise again, the old poison, and I realized that making peace with Lucas was not enough. I had to make peace with the comparisons themselves, had to find a way to stop letting other people's measuring define my worth. That turned out to be the hardest work of all. What saved me was a decision I made, with Lucas's help, to change my relationship to the comparisons entirely. I decided that every time someone compared us, I would refuse to accept the frame. When a relative praised Lucas and then turned to me, I would not shrink into the shadow. I would celebrate my brother's gift genuinely, without measuring myself against it, and then I would stand in my own worth without apology. It took practice. It took years. But slowly I learned to hear a comparison and let it pass through me without wounding me, because I no longer needed to win it. I knew who I was now, and I knew who Lucas was, and I knew that the two of us were not in a race. We were on the same team. We always had been. Lucas helped me in this more than anyone. Having nearly died, having confessed his own hidden envy, he became fierce about protecting our bond from the world's comparisons. When someone would compare us in front of him, he would gently but firmly refuse the frame, would praise me specifically, would make clear that he did not see a golden twin and a lesser twin, that he saw his brother, whom he loved and admired. He used the very golden status that had once been a shadow over me to shield me from that shadow. The brother whose brilliance had once diminished me now used that brilliance to lift me up. And in doing so, he taught me the final lesson, that the people who are compared to us can be our fiercest protectors, if we let them. As we grew into adults, Lucas and I diverged, finally, into genuinely different lives, and the divergence was the best thing that ever happened to us. He went one way, I went another, into fields and lives that had nothing to do with each other, where no one could compare us because we were no longer doing the same things. And free of the comparison at last, we discovered that we could simply love each other, delight in each other, be brothers without the shadow. Distance, in the end, gave us the thing that closeness never could. We stopped being two versions of the same thing and became two whole people who happened to share a face and a birthday and the deepest love either of us would ever know. There is a moment I hold on to from Lucas's wedding, years later. I was his best man, of course, as he would be mine, and in my speech I told the whole room the truth, that I had spent my childhood in my brother's shadow, resenting him, and that his illness had taught me that the shadow had never been real, that we had never been in competition, that the person I had thought was diminishing me had actually been my other half the whole time. And I looked at Lucas, my golden twin, my brother, and I told him, in front of everyone, that being compared to him for 18 years had been the great wound of my childhood, and that discovering he was not my rival but my other half had been the great healing of my adulthood. He wept. So did I. So did most of the room. I learned so much from those years about the difference between comparison and competition. The world compares us to each other constantly, and it is almost impossible to grow up without internalizing those comparisons, without measuring your worth against the people around you. But comparison is a trap, a lie, a way of turning the people who should be our closest allies into rivals we can never quite beat. Lucas and I were compared for 18 years, and it nearly destroyed the most important relationship in both our lives, and the tragedy of it is that we were never actually competing at all. We were two brothers, on the same side, whom the world had tricked into feeling like opponents. It took his illness to show us the truth. The deepest thing I learned is that the shadow I spent my childhood trapped in was not cast by Lucas at all. It was cast by comparison itself, by the habit, my own habit and the world's, of measuring one person against another. Lucas was not a shadow. He was a light. And I had experienced his light as a shadow only because I had been standing in the posture of comparison, measuring myself against him instead of standing beside him and being warmed by the same sun. The moment I stopped comparing, the shadow disappeared, and my brother became what he had always truly been, not the thing that diminished me, but the thing that completed me. The shadow was never him. It was the comparing. And the comparing was something I could choose to lay down. The memory I treasure most is a quiet one, from a few years after Lucas's recovery. We were sitting together, just the two of us, and Lucas said, out of nowhere, "Do you remember when we used to feel like we were competing?" And I said yes. And he said, "Wasn't that strange, that we could love each other so much and still feel like rivals?" And I said yes, it was the strangest thing. And then we just sat there, two grown men who had once been trapped in each other's shadows, now completely free of it, completely at peace, two halves of one whole finally resting in the simple fact of belonging to each other. There was no comparison left in us. There was just love. It had been under the shadow the whole time, waiting. Lucas and I are inseparable now, closer than most people can imagine, bonded by the near loss that woke us both up and by the shared understanding of what we almost let comparison steal from us. And whenever I meet siblings who are trapped in the same trap we were, twins or not, locked in a comparison that is poisoning their love, I tell them our story. I tell them that the sibling they resent is not their rival, that the comparison is a lie, that they are on the same team and always have been. Most of them do not believe me at first. I did not believe it either, until my brother almost died. But it is true. The people we are compared to are not our competitors. They are, so often, the ones who love us most. I have carried the lesson beyond my brother, into every part of my life. The habit of comparison does not stop at siblings. We compare ourselves to friends, to colleagues, to strangers, to the curated lives we see everywhere, and every comparison diminishes us the same way Lucas's shadow once diminished me. And I have learned to catch it, to notice when I am measuring myself against someone, and to stop, and to step out of the posture of comparison into the posture of standing beside. Because I know, now, from the deepest experience, that comparison turns allies into rivals and light into shadow, and that laying it down is the way back to peace. Lucas taught me that, in a hospital bed, when he told me he had been envying me all along. I want to say something about what it did to Lucas, being the golden twin, because it is a part of this story people miss. Everyone assumed Lucas had it easy, that being the gifted one, the golden one, was a blessing. But it was its own kind of prison. He felt unseen behind his gifts, loved for a performance rather than for himself, terrified that if he ever stopped being golden, the love would stop too. His brilliance was a mask he could never take off, and it was lonely behind it. The golden twin and the lesser twin were both suffering, both trapped, both aching to be seen as their real selves. There is no winner in the game of comparison. Everyone who plays it loses, including, especially, the one who appears to be winning. People sometimes ask me whether I still feel any of the old resentment, any trace of the shadow. And I can honestly say that I do not, that it is completely gone, and that its going is one of the great freedoms of my life. But it did not go on its own. It went because I chose, over and over, to lay down the comparison, to celebrate my brother instead of measuring myself against him, to stand beside him in the same sun instead of in his shadow. Freedom from comparison is not a thing that happens to you. It is a thing you practice, a discipline, a daily choice to refuse the frame the world keeps offering. I practice it still. And every day I practice it, I get to love my brother more freely, which is the whole reward. Lucas's illness gave us many gifts, but the greatest was perspective. When you nearly lose someone, all the petty accounting falls away, and you see with terrible clarity what actually matters. And what mattered, it turned out, was not who was the better twin, not the comparisons, not the shadow, but simply that we had each other, that we were two halves of one improbable whole, that we got to walk through life beside the one person who had shared it with us from before the very beginning. Everything else was noise. The illness stripped away the noise and left us with the signal, and the signal was love, and it had been there under the comparison the whole time, waiting for us to be quiet enough to hear it. If there is one thing my brother and I learned, it is that comparison is a thief, and it steals most cruelly from the people who love each other most. The world will compare you to others your whole life, will measure you against your siblings, your friends, your colleagues, your peers, and every one of those comparisons is a small lie that can turn love into rivalry if you let it. But you do not have to let it. You can refuse the frame. You can step out of the shadow of comparison and into the light of simply being yourself, beside the people you love, on the same team, warmed by the same sun. Lucas and I almost lost each other to comparison. Do not lose the people you love to the same thief. Lay it down. I learned that the sibling in your shadow, or the sibling whose shadow you feel you live in, is not your rival. They are your other half, your ally, your fiercest potential protector, if only you can stop comparing long enough to see them. Lucas spent his golden childhood envying my freedom while I spent mine resenting his gifts, and the whole thing was a tragedy of two people who loved each other failing to see that they were never opponents. If you have a sibling you have been quietly competing with, resenting, measuring yourself against, I am begging you, stop, before it costs you what it almost cost us. Turn to them. See them. They are not your competition. They are, very possibly, the person who loves you most in all the world. There is an image I carry from the hospital, from the night Lucas told me he had always wished he could be more like me. It is the sight of my golden twin, weak and frightened in that bed, confessing that he had spent his whole life envying the very things I had built to escape him. That moment shattered the entire story I had told myself about the two of us, revealed it as the illusion it had always been. There was no golden twin and lesser twin. There were just two boys, each certain the other had it better, each aching to be seen. I return to that image whenever I catch myself envying someone, comparing myself, feeling less. Because it reminds me that the person I am comparing myself to is very likely comparing themselves to someone too, that we are all just frightened people longing to be seen, and that comparison is a lie every single time. The memory that means the most to me now is simple. It is Lucas and me, grown, sitting side by side somewhere ordinary, not talking, just being together, two halves of one whole at complete peace. No comparison. No shadow. No competition. Just the deep, wordless comfort of being beside the person who has been beside you since before you were born. That peace was always available to us. It was waiting under the shadow the entire time, from the very beginning. We just could not reach it until we laid down the comparing. And now that we have, it is the ground we stand on, the deepest and steadiest love of both our lives. I would not trade my twin for anything. Not even for a childhood free of his shadow. Because the shadow led us, in the end, to the light. I asked Lucas once whether he would change our childhood if he could, take away the comparisons, the shadow, the years of secret aching on both sides. And he thought about it, the way he thinks about everything now, and he said no. He said that if we had not suffered the comparison, we might never have understood how precious our bond was, might have taken each other for granted, might never have had that shattering, healing night in the hospital that finally made us see each other. He said the shadow was the price of the light, and that he would pay it again. And I understood that my brother had made peace not just with our present, but with our whole painful past, had transformed even the years of comparison into something he could be grateful for. That is a freedom I am still learning from. These days, when I catch myself measuring my life against someone else's, comparing, feeling less, I think of Lucas in that hospital bed, and the whole illusion of comparison collapses again. I remember that the golden twin was envying the lesser one the entire time, that comparison is always a lie, that everyone we measure ourselves against is measuring themselves against someone too. And I lay it down. I step out of the shadow and back into the sun. My brother taught me that, through the near loss that woke us both. And every time I lay down a comparison, I am free again, and I love the people around me more, and I remember that we are all, every one of us, on the same team, warmed by the same sun, if only we would stop competing long enough to feel it. If there is one thing I want you to take from my brother's story and mine, it is that the people you are compared to, the people whose shadow you feel you live in, are not your rivals. They are so often your other half, your closest ally, the person who loves you most. Comparison is a thief that turns love into competition, and it steals most cruelly from families, from siblings, from the people who should be closest. But you can refuse it. You can lay down the measuring and step out of the shadow and discover that the person you thought was diminishing you has been your greatest light all along. Lucas was mine. I almost missed it. Do not miss yours. I learned that there is no winner in the game of comparison, that even the one who appears to be winning is losing, trapped behind a golden mask, aching to be seen. So the answer is not to try to win the comparison. The answer is to stop playing altogether, to lay down the measuring, to celebrate the people around you instead of ranking yourself against them, to stand beside them in the same sun. If you are trapped in someone's shadow, or feel that you are, the way out is not to become brighter than them. The way out is to stop comparing, to step to their side, and to discover that you were never in a race at all. You were always, always on the same team. Lucas and I found that out. I hope you find it out sooner than we did. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. It truly means the world that you are here. If my brother Lucas and our long journey out of the shadow moved your heart, please give this video a like and subscribe to AU Family Channel, where a brand new story is waiting for you every single week. And remember what a twin learned in a hospital in the middle of the night. Comparison is a thief that turns the people who love us most into rivals, and the way out is not to win, but to lay the measuring down and step into the same sun. So this week, if you have been comparing yourself to someone you love, stop, and step to their side. I will see you in the next one.